Whoa! Well, howdy, and welcome to another episode of the Hat Historian. In this video, I'll be talking about a hat that throughout the world proclaims America. The cowboy hat. An enduring symbol of the American West, the broad-brimmed, sharp-creased cowboy hat is arguably the United States' national hat. Worn mostly in the mid and southwest areas of the country by workers, farmhands, and anybody spending a long time out under the elements, it is spread to be part of the uniforms of some law enforcement, formal fashion accessory in traditionally frontier states, and is worn at country music concerts or by anyone wishing to channel the Western style throughout the nation. It is also often worn in much the same way by workers in Mexico and central Canada, countries with strong cultural links and similar weather constraints as the United States. In the rest of the world, the cowboy hat is part of the American stereotype, much like the beret is for the French, the bowler for the English, or the ushanka for the Russians, and is worn by those wanting to embrace that image. But the cowboy hat started out much as it is still used by many, a simple work item. As I've stated before, people, especially rural workers who spend a lot of time outside, have been wearing broad-brimmed hats since time immemorial. The ancient Greek farmers and travelers wore the petassos, which served to shield their heads from the Mediterranean sun, and the practice spread with the Roman conquest, and it was then found throughout the empire. Relatively more recently, wide-brimmed hats were popular during the early Renaissance, sometimes known as wide-awake hats. As I've said in my video on the tricorn, these were sometimes pinned up on the side, for either style or practicality, as seen on musketeers. Pinning up three sides is how the tricorn was created. These wide hats were particularly worn in the Mediterranean, where the climate necessitated protection from the sun. One remnant of these traditional hats is the cappello romano, sometimes worn by Catholic clergy. But another place that these hats were widespread was Spain, and this becomes relevant to our story with the Spanish colonizations of the Americas. In the sunny climates of Mexico and what is now the southwestern United States, hats were a necessity, especially in the days before sunscreen. Colonists from both the Spanish and British territories brought white hats with them, either made of felt or straw, inspired from their home countries. The Spanish often wore round straw hats which, combined with local weaving techniques, evolved into the famous sombreros and its variants, which was widely worn by the vaqueros that wandered the large plains of the American West. Meanwhile, in the southern United States, soft slouch hats were very popular with both white farmers and slave workers for similar reasons. There was no particularly uniform look for them, but most feature a domed crown that was pinched from taking it off, and a wide brim. Many Confederate soldiers actually preferred to wear these slouch hats in combat, rather than the official forage cap, and Union cavalry officers also adopted versions as well. As the United States expanded into western territories, both before and after the Civil War, American settlers and Mexican vaqueros started encountering each other, and influencing each other's styles, including their headwear. But with the mass settling of the West after the war, the hat that tended to be the most widespread was not the cowboy hat, or even its slouch hat ancestors, but in fact the bowler. The large slouch hat would have been only worn by ranchers or cattlemen, probably looked at with disdain by the town dwellers. Despite this, demand for large, rugged hats to protect from the elements only grew. Then, in 1865, a Philadelphia hatter came and created a legendary hat that would become the basis for the modern cowboy hat: John Stetson and his famous Boss of the Plains. John Batterson Stetson was born in 1830, the son of a New Jersey hatter. Diagnosed at a young age with tuberculosis, he was only given a short time to live by doctors, and decided to make the most of it by traveling extensively out west, which were still being settled. Out there, he met frontiersmen, cattle ranchers, cowboys, and pioneers. They tended to wear a whole variety of hats, from fur coonskin caps to wool derbies to straw slouch hats. Each of these had their drawbacks, either not shielding from the sun, letting rain through, being too small, etc. Stetson, as a hatter himself, saw an opportunity and wanted to create a universal hat that could fit the needs of these men on the rugged frontier. Settling in Philadelphia to start his own hat business, in 1865 he created a fur-felt hat with a tight weave, a tall domed crown to insulate the head, and a wide brim that could provide shade and protection from the rain. The tight felt weave made the hat waterproof, to the point where a famous image from early advertisements showed a cowboy giving water to his horse in the hat, an image still used by the company. And this weave also made it durable for hard work. He named this hat the Boss of the Plains, and it proved to be an instant success. And with his name stamped on the inside of the band, Stetson became synonymous with hats throughout the West. It should be noted that, despite that doctor's prediction of an early death, John Stetson lived to be 75 and died a rich man, beloved by his employees for his generous and humane work ethics, his company a household name. The boss of the plains was originally sold open-crowned, meaning with its brim flat and its crown dome-shaped. And for the first decades of its existence, this is how its owners tended to wear it. But of course, through use and wear and tear, it started to take on different shapes as the wearers grabbed the crown to put it on or take it off, creating creases, or shaped the brim to better suit their uses. The sign of a hard-working man, creases began to be a point of pride, with cowboys giving their hats specific shapes depending on local trends. It was even said in some cases that the ranch a man worked on could be identified by the creases on his hat. They would also sometimes replace the plain hatband with decorated versions or tassels. The opportunities for personalization were endless, and soon vendors started marketing pre-creased hats in different styles, starting with the Carlsbad or Gus, but there are many creases that continue today, each with its name, amongst others the pinch front, my favorite, the one on my hat, the Montana, the Brick, the Gambler, and the most popular one today, the Cattleman. But these are not by any means the only ones, and one can still buy an open-crowned hat and shape it as one pleases. The shape of the brim, with its upturned sides, comes from early cattlemen folding them up to keep them out of the way of their arms when they were using a lasso, giving us the iconic shape that we know today. As the hat's success spread, particularly in southern states like Texas, other manufacturers started making similar headgear. For hotter climates, straw versions were made. Versions, often with the Montana peak, sometimes compared to a lemon squeezer, were adopted by the military, famously by the Rough Riders of the Spanish-American War. Incidentally, in 1912, the USS Maine, whose sinking had sparked the war, was raised, and within it they found a Stetson hat that, once cleaned of the mud and algae that had covered it, looked brand new even after spending 14 years in the sea, cementing the hat's reputation for durability. But this working hat truly became a symbol of the West through entertainers, starting with Buffalo Bill and his Wild West show. Showman William Buffalo Bill Cody, who had spent his youth on the frontier, toured the world with his show depicting a romanticized version of the Wild West, and he and many of his performers wore wide-brimmed Stetson hats, and it became an enduring part of the popular image of the era. Later on, this was reinforced by one of the most influential film genres in movie history, the Hollywood Western. Early movie stars like Tom Mix wore large 10-gallon hats in their movies, incidentally not named for the capacity. Indeed, the average hat holds at best half a gallon, but one theory is that it comes from the Spanish word galón, referring to braids around the crown. And of course, later movie stars like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood also wore cowboy hats in westerns. By that time, thanks to these depictions, the cowboy hat had become inescapably associated with the Old West, and by extension, throughout the world, with America. Children wore them to emulate their silver screen heroes, and every man dreamed at some point of being the man with no name. This popularity made it go beyond its humble working roots in the Southwest to expand to other classes. Urban dwellers in Texas, some businessmen, and particularly politicians started wearing it as a symbol of regional pride. The famous Texas Rangers made the cowboy hat part of their official attire, with other law enforcement agencies later adopting similar hats, and many country singers used it to reinforce their folksy, down-to-earth image. It had also spread across borders, being worn to this day by ranchers in Mexico and as far north as Canada. Also, technically, the tan lemon squeezer creased hats of the famous Canadian Mounties is, and is officially referred to as, a Stetson. While men might not wear hats as much as they used to, in some ways, the cowboy hat is something of an exception. In its utilitarian capacity, it is still very popular amongst ranchers, farmhands, and other outdoor workers throughout rural America, in both felt and straw versions, in order to protect the wearers from the elements, its original purpose. As a cultural icon, it is ever present, from Western entertainment such as rodeos, to businessmen in places like Texas trying to project either state pride or closeness to their workers, to politicians who want to show down-to-earth folksiness, with even presidents, from Eisenhower to Johnson to Reagan to Bush, all seen wearing one on occasion. It is also a staple of country music concerts or bars that have a country theme, even as far east as New York City. One can see them everywhere at country music shows, for example Garth Brooks or Shania Twain concerts, on both men and women. In other countries, wearing a cowboy hat is a sign of someone who admires or wishes to embrace American culture. Newer Western TV shows, or shows trying to channel that cowboy archetype, will almost invariably give the main character some sort of cowboy-style hat. While other sunny countries have their own versions of the broad-brimmed hats, from Australia to Argentina to Colombia, few are as iconic or recognizable throughout the world as the American Stetson. Truly the most enduring symbol of the West, and in many ways America's national hat, the popularity of the cowboy hat is unlikely to fade, and it has earned its place in American history. So I hope once again that you've enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you.